Now I want to talk to you about how do prices change. So we know that where quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, we are at an equilibrium, and that tells us what the market price is going to be, how much you have to pay for the ice cream, and how many units are going to be sold in the market. So if we're at equilibrium, equilibrium implies that it's stable. Well, what causes prices to change? Here is where our determinants, our assumptions, or our shifters about demand and supply come into play. So you absolutely have to know these demand shifters and supply shifters, okay, so that you can figure out what's going to happen in the market. So let's say that one of these assumptions changes, causing our demand curve to shift to the right. What will happen? Okay, just for simplicity, let's just say number of buyers increases. When that happens, our demand curve is going to shift to the right. I'm going to call this D1, and I'm going to call this D2. When the demand curve shifts to the right, two things happen. We can see that we are now at a new equilibrium with our new demand curve. So we're going to call this E2. Note that the supply curve has not changed. This is still supply curve 1. What has happened to the supply curve is that now that the demand curve has shifted to the right, prices have gone up. Okay? We know they've gone up because along the graph, where we start at 0 at the origin, and as we go up, we know that the numbers get greater. So let's say that this price is now $4. Okay, so the new equilibrium quantity might be 8 units. Okay, so what has happened, and you want to write this down, when the demand curve shifts to the right, our equilibrium price, PE, remember that means equilibrium price, is going to increase, and our equilibrium quantity is going to increase. Okay? We see this in real life. Anytime demand for a product shifts to the right, price goes up, and equilibrium quantity increases as well, assuming this is the only shift. Now, let's say that demand for ice cream decreases. Maybe it's discovered that, as I mentioned before, ice cream, not too good for you, or maybe yogurt is very trendy, maybe something else happens, and demanders just don't want that product quite so much. Then the demand curve is going to shift to the left. Okay, so let's say the demand curve shifts to the left. Okay, and we'll call this D3. What happens? Now we have another equilibrium point resulting from this leftward shift of our demand curve. And now, okay, so here we go. Demand curve shifts to the left or decreases. We have a new equilibrium price of $2. So we know equilibrium price goes down and equilibrium quantity goes down as well. Okay? So you will want to go through each of these variables and figure out what will happen to equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity when the demand curve shifts. Well, what happens if one of these assumptions changes? What if there are more sellers in the market for ice cream? What will happen? Okay, so if there's more sellers, we know that the supply curve is going to shift to the right, to S2. Well, what happens? Our equilibrium price goes down to $2. And our new equilibrium quantity may actually increase to 8 units. Okay, so E2 gives us a lower price and more quantity. So that we know if supply shifts to the right, equilibrium price is going to go down, equilibrium quantity is going to go up. Okay. Now, we might also have a situation where sellers leave the market. Okay? If we have sellers leaving the market, the supply curve is going to shift to the left. And when that happens, we have a new equilibrium. Price is going to be higher, and the amount of product produced is going to be less. So if the supply curve shifts to the left, equilibrium price goes up, equilibrium quantity goes down. So remember that this applies to all the shifters. If these shifters cause the supply curve to shift to the right, we're going to have equilibrium price going down, equilibrium quantity going up. If the shifters cause the supply curve to shift to the left, equilibrium price will increase and equilibrium quantity will decrease. Okay, now I want to go to a problem in your book. This is a problem that you'll most likely be assigned. And I want to show you how to start working on these problems. It's really easy, but it's very important to do one step at a time and analyze the situation. So I'm going to be working on problem number 7 out of your textbook on chapter 3, page 66. And this says, label each of the following scenarios with a set of symbols that best indicates the price change and quantity change that occur in the scenario. In some scenarios, it may not be possible from the information to determine the direction of a particular price change or particular quantity change. So, it says, on a hot day, both the demand for lemonade and the supply of lemonade increase. What is the effect on price and what is the effect on quantity? How do you start a problem like this? I always start the problems as follows. Always start with the graph. This is why I want you to have a stack of paper on your desk, your kitchen table, in your car, wherever you're doing your homework. Start with paper and pencil. And you're going to draw your diagram. And draw the space for your demand and your supply curve. Price on the y-axis, 0 at the origin, quantity on the x-axis. Now we're going to work in the abstract. You're not given numbers, you're just being told that demand is, there's an impact on demand and there's an impact on supply. So what you're going to do is you're going to draw a giant X in this space. Okay? So if you totally forget everything, just remember giant X, S for soaring upward, for Superman, whatever it is that helps you remember. S is upwards for soaring. D, sloping downwards, demand curve. Okay, so that gets you started. Here, you already know that this is our equilibrium price, and this is our equilibrium quantity. Sometimes it's really hard for us to work with abstracts, PE, QE. I know I had trouble doing that when I was in beginning macro and micro. So you can actually put a number there. You're figuring this out on your own. No worries. Let's go ahead and say equilibrium price is $3. Let's go ahead and say equilibrium quantity is 6 units, just to get us started. Now the problem says it's a hot day, and demand for lemonade increases, and supply for lemonade increases. What will be the impact on equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity? Okay, so we need to take this a step at a time. The first thing it says is demand for lemonade increases because it's a hot summer day. So let's figure out what the impact on that price is going to be and on that quantity. So demand for lemonade increases. Okay, so we have had a rightward shift of the demand curve. So we know that if the demand curve shifts to the right, what's going to happen? Well, we're going to move from this point to this point. We're going to have a new equilibrium. Okay, so that's E1. Now our new equilibrium is going to show a new equilibrium price. Now, because we're going up along this graph, this is 0, there's 1, there's 2, this is 3, this is possibly $4. That means price went up. Equilibrium price went up. What about equilibrium quantity? Well, this is 0, we're moving away from 0, so this could be equilibrium quantity went to 8 units, which is more than the original of 6, right? So equilibrium quantity went up. So now we have the first impact of what has happened, okay? It's a hot summer day, demand for lemonade goes up. That's something that's going to happen. Now, let's figure out what happens when a supply curve shifts. It says supply of lemonade goes up also. So what you could do is figure out, well, what happens when the supply of lemonade increases? Okay. So I am going to use a different color. And I'm going to have the supply curve for lemonade increase. And for right now, I'm going to take out this second demand curve just to make it easier for you to see. Okay, and we'll put this back in a little bit. But we want to just assess the impact of a supply curve. Okay. So it said the supply curve increases. Because it's a hot day, sellers are probably thinking that they can make more profit. Okay. So what happens when supply increases? Equilibrium price goes down. And what happens to equilibrium quantity? Equilibrium quantity goes up. Okay, so we have these two forces that are occurring. Okay, so this is another equilibrium. Okay. So when you're solving this problem, take a look at, well, what happens when the demand curve shifts to the right? Price goes up, equilibrium quantity goes up. What happens when supply shifts to the right? Equilibrium price goes down, equilibrium quantity goes up. Okay. What this means then is that when we have two forces occurring, when we have, I'm going to draw back the demand curve that we talked about earlier. Okay. We'll have the force of prices going up, quantity demanded increasing. When that's coupled with supply, we have prices going down and equilibrium quantity and supply increasing. So that means that, for instance, in this, we have absolute certainty that equilibrium quantity is going to increase. That's going to happen when we have both curves shifting to the right. But what we don't know is exactly what's going to happen to pricing, because we were not told the magnitude of the shifts. So this would be a question mark under your answers, and definitely you would have QE, equilibrium quantity, increasing. Okay, this is 7b. It says, on a cold day, both the demand for ice cream and the supply of ice cream decrease. What do you think is going to happen to equilibrium price and to equilibrium quantity? So we're going to start in the same way. We will start drawing our demand curve and drawing our supply curve and finding a starting equilibrium. So this is what you would like to do. I would like for you to do. Take draw a big X, label your graph, label your equilibrium point, your equilibrium price, and your equilibrium quantity. It's a cold day, demand shifts to the left. We know that if demand shifts to the left, at E2, our equilibrium price is lower. Okay, at E2, our equilibrium quantity is lower. Okay, so we already know that if demand shifts to the left, equilibrium demand and equilibrium quantity will result in lower prices and lower quantity demanded. Okay. Now the problem always also says that equilibrium supply, or that supply shifts to the left. What happens? So I'm going to go ahead and shift the supply curve. Okay. And we know that the impact of a leftward shifting supply curve is going to be higher prices and less quantity, less equilibrium quantity. Okay, so this is our new E3. Okay, so for sure, we know that when the supply curve and the demand curve both shift left, equilibrium quantity is going to go down, and we have uncertainty about the price. A problem from chapter 3 as well that asks you to explain what will happen to pricing. Demand increases and supply decreases. That represents different problems. So let's take a look at that. Well, what do we know? We know that if demand shifts to the left, what's going to happen? Okay, so let me just draw a little diagram over here on the side. And this is how I'd like, if you guys are stuck, this is how I want you to start puzzling through these problems. Do not try to do this in your head at this stage, okay? So, this is our equilibrium price. This is our equilibrium quantity. Demand shifts to the left. We know that equilibrium price is going to go down. And we know that equilibrium quantity is going to go down. Okay. Then this problem says that supply shifted to the right. Okay, so what are the impacts when supply shifts to the right? Let's draw our diagram out. Okay, supply shifts to the right. Well, what does this tell us? Supply is shifted to the right. Our equilibrium price has gone down. And our equilibrium quantity has gone up. Okay, so we know that if supply okay, so those are the two factors that we know for sure is going to happen. So what can we say? Well, if we have a situation, well, let's put both of these activities on the same graph. What does that mean? What do we know? Okay, so demand shifts to the left, supply shifts to the right. For sure, prices will go down, but we're not sure about the quantity. Okay. So now I'm going to take all of this and I'm going to draw it on one big graph so we can see what happens. start with your X, easy to remember. All right, demand shifts to the left. We're going to take our demand curve and we're going to shift it to the left. A different color here, demand curve shifts to the left. That's our D2. And we're told that supply shifts to the right. So, supply shifts to the right, that's S2. What happens? Well, for sure, price went down. Okay, so we have a lower price. That happens for sure. But in terms of quantity, it's a little bit uncertain because if, let's say that the supply curve hadn't shifted quite so far, let's say it had shifted less than that, then we could have had a situation with less quantity. Okay? So now we know, in this particular case, it looks like there was more quantity than original, but unless we know the magnitude of the shift, we are uncertain. So we can say that equilibrium price is going to go down, and with respect to equilibrium quantity, we don't know. Okay, I hope this helps. You will be assigned problems like this as part of your homework, and you're expected to know this. This is just part of model building and trying to understand what's going on. There are so many things that are happening right now that tie into these dynamics, and so hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about those. Thank you.